You can't be dropping
hey
those.
guys.
You can't be dropping those bombs at me like when the countdown's going on, Laso.
That's the best time to drop them.
Hashtag Nation Bills Mafia. Welcome once again to Hashtag Sports. Sorry, I'm a little under the weather. You guys are gonna have to deal with that if you're listening on iTunes and Spotify. I apologize. If you're watching us on YouTube, you know why we have faces for radio. Okay. That being said,
That's why you brought the talker on today.
That is
You're
true.
sick. You can't talk a lot.
100%. Joe is on vacation, and Paul will be joining us shortly. So don't you guys worry about that. As always, you can find all of our stuff on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. All shows are sponsored by Mr. Rogers Homes in association with Crier.co. Big news coming out of One Bills Drive, Ryan. We're talking about the Buffalo Bills extending for 4 more years, $68 million. Ed Oliver. We talked quite a bit in the offseason about Oliver, and he had some Instagram posts like show me the bag or whatever he had on it. And a lot of stuff that we're going to explore tonight talking about Oliver, because Twitter was completely split down the middle on the extension for Oliver. Obviously, we're going to share our takes as well. Benjamin Murphy comes in and says, apparently we're paying mid players now. I'm not so much mid. If the way that it works with the NFL and a lot of interior defensive linemen, not a lot of stuff shows up on the stat sheet. So some of those guys that they just start talking about, well, they don't. Oliver really doesn't have eye popping stats, but we're going to get into all that. But first, let me welcome Ryan. Ryan, how you doing tonight, buddy?
Oh, I'm doing good, man. It's been what was an uneventful weekend of news, at least, turned into, it was a little bit of a downside on Friday. The news started to come out that maybe the Bills weren't necessarily in the running for Hopkins, and all of a sudden the Ed Oliver news broke, and now we've got Oliver to talk about, and a lever that got pulled that I don't think, at least on our show last weekend, none of us thought that was a lever that they could pull to open up some cap space. But here we go. I mean, Bean doing what Bean does, right? Making some room, and we'll see what he uses the money for. But I don't know that it's for anything other than freeing up some cash. So let's see.
Yeah, I think so. So the official extension is 4 years, $68 million, including $45 million guaranteed. He is locked up through 2027. He's going to be, what is he, 20, 25, 26?
25 now, yeah, almost 26, yeah.
25 now. So, I mean, you start to talk about different types of contracts here and there with Ed Oliver. Paul and I have talked many times on the show about, you can find undersized defensive tackles if you want. But Ryan, we were talking about it right before the show. You thought that possibly the Tremaine Edmonds deal was a reason that I don't want to necessarily say panic, but do you think that the Edmonds deal kind of forced the Bills' hand into re-signing Oliver?
Yeah, I think there was some trepidation on the side of the Bills. Obviously with Edmonds, they played, let's wait and see. Edmonds, it's kind of the old adage, right? The player bet on himself. The team bet that there was going to be some way that they could bring him back at or below market value. Tremaine Edmonds went out last season and had a career season, and turned that into a huge payday that the Bills just didn't feel like they could match. And I think part of that is what drove this, because, with McDermott being the one that's going to be calling the plays, McDermott's running the defense. McDermott of anybody would have some type of insight as to what he thinks Oliver's impact is going to be to this team this year. So if he thinks that Oliver is going to be a big piece of this defense and he's going to have a big season, got to figure out a way to get this guy under contract, because it's either we get one great year out of Oliver and he goes, or we want to have him around for the next few years. And then keep in mind, there were no defensive tackles under contract next year until the Oliver signing became official. So, I think there's a lot of moving pieces that caused and triggered this signing. But I think the Tremaine Edmonds situation did play into it a bit, is that Bean and McDermott decided that Ed Oliver, at the 16th highest paid interior defensive lineman in the NFL, was worth more than a third round pick in the compensatory formula in the 2025 draft.
Yeah, I mean that also has to factor into it, with the compensatory formula, and I think we could start to see more signs of this as far as McDermott taking over and what takes precedent. I mean, maybe if Leslie Frazier was here still, maybe he was the guy, was pushing for Edmonds and he wanted Edmonds to lead his defense. And now McDermott's like, oh, I'm taking over now. I want Oliver in there. And that is true. He is the only defensive tackle that's signed for the 2024 season. I know a lot of people were kind of clamoring for Daquan Jones for him to get extended. I believe he's 32. So, yeah,
Mhm.
32. So, I mean, obviously, you can extend him, building some voidable years. Bean's been very careful with that, though, as far as the voidable years go. He's not a Howie Roseman. He doesn't like building in for 3-4 years for some guys to be extended just to kind of balance out their cap because, eventually you got to blow up the team after that. So,
Sure. Yeah.
Oliver, I know and a lot of people will be down on him. And the people that are down on him, I just want you to take a look at how he played when he was next to Miller. And I think that's one of the things that McDermott is really excited about in this, upcoming season. However many games they decide to have Miller for, if he comes back week 1, week 6, week 10, whatever. We talked about it on our schedule episode about Von Miller's return. But one of the things that you want to say is how impactful is Miller? How impactful is Oliver when Miller's next to him? And
Mhm.
if you want to talk about going into the 2024 and possibly the 2025 season with Rousseau, Oliver, and Miller as your 3 out of your 4, and you just plug and play some monster in there to take the one technique off, take the pressure off of Oliver, where he could pin his ears back and be a disruptor. Um, I think it's going to be vital for the Bills moving forward. Now, do you think that this changes the defensive philosophy for the Buffalo Bills as far as more? Are we going to see more of Ed Oliver than the 50% snap count that he had in 2022?
Yeah, I mean, 2022, keep in mind, he was running a snap count, 49.4% at that point in time.
Yeah,
It's actually was down. It was about 12 snaps a game from where he was in 2021. So interesting to see that type of change. But I think some of that had to do with they really were trying to figure out how this defensive line fit together.
yeah,
Um, they had all brand new guys with the exception really of Oliver was the only steadfast that was there seeing significant time in 2021 before coming into 2022. Because again, they had Rousseau, who was all accounts, a rookie. Boogie Basham, again, same thing. AJ Epinesa was considered a veteran on the defensive line last season. Miller was new. Phillips was back. Lawson was back. So those were guys that were not there in 2021. Now they're there. So I think a lot of that had to do with the fact they were trying to mix and match, figure out which guys played best together. But you have to expect that if you tie your horse to this guy to the tune of 16 to 17 million dollars a year for the next 5 seasons, you don't do that if you don't expect him to play a significant number of snaps in your defense. So I would fully expect, like you said, it's going to be Oliver and Rousseau are probably going to be the two guys that are just about playing the bulk of the snaps on defense. Now I don't know if that's going to be 60%. I don't know if that's going to be 70%. It's not going to be 100, but it's going to
mhm,
be the significant time and the most time on the field. You're going to see Oliver Rousseau and then some combination of Miller, Phillips, Lawson, Basham, and probably Settle going to work in there as well. So and then again, you'll have that opportunity. But yeah, I definitely expect him to play probably somewhere in the range of 60 snaps a game, which would put him about 60% of the defensive snaps per game.
yeah. As far as the 2022 goes, now obviously with McDermott at the helm, we don't know. We could probably see a very different snap count as far as it goes. But yeah, you're right. I mean, Tremaine Edmonds, Jordan Poyer were in 72, 71 as far as linebackers go. Daquan Jones was your leading man out of the gate with 61% last year.
Yeah.
And obviously, they do not play the same. Oliver is more of a 3 technique, and Jones is more of a 1 tech, which means obviously they're in different positions on the line as far as that goes. But Oliver, for much of his career up until this point, a lot of people were down on him because obviously you're a 9th overall pick. You're supposed to be a guy that comes in and makes an impact right away. And to people who watch the games and kind of break down, the stuff there in the trenches it's very ugly down there, and there's not a lot of stuff that shows up on the stat sheet. And a lot of things that Oliver does, you have to account for his speed, you got to account for his athleticism and stuff like that, and teams have to plan for him. And when he was on the field with Miller, especially, and sometimes Rousseau, he was a very disruptive player in there and doing a lot of different things that let other guys succeed
Yep.
on that defense. You could probably say that maybe a combination of Jones, Settle, and Oliver were the reason why Tremaine Edmonds had the season that he had and was able to garner the contract that he did for the Chicago Bears. I mean, you could make that argument. And that being said, do you think that the expectation and the pressure for Oliver has increased now that he's finally paid? Do you think he's going to get down to business and he's going to be a more impactful player for the Buffalo Bills now that he has? I mean, the first thing was he was a first rounder. He should be dominating everybody. Now he's getting paid $68 million over a 4-year extension. And like I said, we'll see tomorrow how that all plays out, if there is voidable years built in and whatnot. But do you see a different Ed Oliver coming in 2023? And then if we do, could we see a complete change in the defensive philosophy coming from McDermott?
Yeah, I mean, I think the defensive philosophy by and large is going to be different. It's going to have to be without a guy like Edmonds in the middle of that defense. But when you look at Oliver's impact, I mean, Oliver's been, he's been the same guy since he came into the league. I mean, really 2020 was kind of his first, full season well, sorry, 2019 was his first full season. So you go through his stats, right? 5 sacks, 43 tackles, 3 sacks, 33 tackles, 4 sacks, 41 tackles, 2.5 sacks, 34 tackles. So he's right in that, 4 sack, 35, 40 tackle range every season. But where he doesn't get the credit, like you said, is when you watch the film, you see consistently double team situations heading Oliver's way, consistently having to account for him. As a quarterback, how, the running backs, when they're picking up blitz protections, right? It's always inside out. That's what they teach those guys. You look inside out. And when you look inside and Oliver's there and he's halfway to beating his man, that makes it difficult for those guys to then get outside and help on a Rousseau or a Miller or, Lawson, those blitzing corners, things like that. Those running backs can't pick those guys up because they have to account for the fact that Ed Oliver's coming hot and heavy right up the middle into my quarterback's face. So, those are the types of plays that I think Oliver tends to make, forcing running plays to go outside instead of coming inside because he's causing disruptions. It's the same reason that Jordan Phillips got brought back. He plays that same type of ball, is that it's just so disruptive. Now, the bad thing for Phillips is that it only happens, 4 or 5 times a game, whereas Oliver is consistently out there on a regular basis. So I do anticipate there being more pressure coming from that defensive tackle position this year. And by doing that, hopefully allowing some room for the edge rushers to get home a little bit more frequently, potentially some additional blitzes coming from a Taron Johnson, Matt Milano, those types of guys who are going to come off those edges. And that middle disruption is going to be so important, especially Aaron Rodgers, right? He's not the most mobile guy in the world anymore. Mac Jones, not the most mobile quarterback in the league. Tua Tagovailoa, not the most mobile quarterback. They're all in your division. So you've got to create havoc in the middle of the field as much as possible. And again, give those edges time to get home on those extended rushes that they tend to have. Miller loves to go outside with that bend move, and that's a long developing situation. He's not getting to the quarterback in 3 seconds. He's got to take 4.5, which means you've got to have mess in the middle so that he doesn't have running backs coming and chipping on him.
Yeah. I mean, that should settle some of the Bills Mafia, I think. If you start thinking about it, if this was a good signing for the Buffalo Bills and, some of the things that were going on at One Bills Drive as far as Oliver goes and the expectation of Oliver, if that didn't settle your mind a little bit, Bills Mafia, I don't know what will, but we have a guest, right?
Guest. You're talking about a guest.
Hi, sweetie. How you doing?
What's going on, guys?
Oh, hey, man.
Hey.
Yeah, Mario, it's a different inflection.
Yeah. What's up?
Always.
Yeah. What's up? Hey, guys.
What's up, nerds? That's what you missed an opportunity, Paul.
That's, you know what? It's fine. It's fine. So that looking at the defensive tackle contracts, right? You can kind of tell Buffalo wasn't really planning to re-sign Ed Oliver. Like when you look at it, because you just renegotiated settle, you brought in Puna Ford, like long-term deal on Oliver, I think feels a little silly for some folks at this point, right? Like when you start talking about dollars and cents, it's like, well, I guess it makes sense to have an interior defensive tackle sign past this year. I think that makes sense, you know. But you could just tell Buffalo wasn't really planning for this. By the way that you went out, you re-signed Phillips, you brought in Puna Ford, you renegotiated settle, you have Daquan Jones there still. You could just kind of tell that Buffalo wasn't really planning for this.
Yeah, Paul, earlier we were just talking about how maybe the Tremaine Edmonds contract kind of forced their hand, and you couldn't lose Oliver and Edmonds. They were, Ryan had said they were betting on themselves and trying to say, maybe they could have signed Edmonds, but then he had his breakout 5th year, and it's like, okay, now we got to pay one of them. You got to pay one of them. And currently on the screen, if you guys are looking at home, we have the current defensive tackle contracts that are, the values and whatnot. And obviously, if you go down the list, a lot of 90s and 80s and 70s in there. And then, as Ryan had mentioned earlier, the 16th highest contract now. You look at it, it's more around the range of like Kenny Clark, Vita Vea, Jonathan Allen, maybe a Leonard Williams, rather than, Jeffrey Simmons, Deron Payne, Aaron Donald. Obviously, Donald is in a class by himself.
Yeah, that's not fair. That's not fair.
No,
I
know
what I mean. Yeah,
but I'm saying though, the type of player like Simmons is what 330, 340. He's like 6'4" or something like that. He's just a different kind of an animal. Chris Jones is a different kind of animal.
But again, Paul, I mean, I'll go back. I'll go back. I talked about the stats before. I mean, look at, not that he's not Aaron Donald, right? Let's get that out of the way as quickly as we can.
100%, yeah.
Aaron Donald's stats last year: 5 sacks, 49 total tackles, right? And what was the stat line that I read for Oliver in 2020? Or I'm sorry, it was 2021. 4 sacks, 41 tackles. So I mean, production wise, if you're looking for a guy that's going to be an impactful player, doesn't get much more impactful than Aaron Donald, and Oliver's not pacing too far behind him. So to put him, 15 pay grades behind Aaron Donald, that feels about right. And that's kind of, I know we were on group text with each other and stuff. And when the numbers came out, Joe Biscaglia did a good job of breaking it down. When you include the 5th year option this year, so it's essentially making a 5-year deal. He's the 16th highest paid interior defensive lineman. That feels right for them, right? And that contract, as all contracts do, is only going to continue to look better, assuming he continues his pace of production. If he takes a step forward, it's going to look miles better. But as these other interior defensive linemen start to sign, his contract's going to look better and better for the Buffalo Bills.
I'm going to say his contract already looks really good, because if you look at who else was drafted in that draft class, and again, like it's always sort of the comparison, right? The guys that you get drafted with are always sort of the measuring stick. So if you look at the other players that were drafted in the top 20, right? There were 4 defensive tackles drafted between 9 and 19 in the 2019 draft. They were Ed Oliver was 9, Christian Wilkins went 13, Dexter Lawrence went 17, and Jeffrey Simmons went 19. So far, the only one without a contract extension is Wilkins. Ed Oliver, 4 years, $68 million with $45 guaranteed. Dexter Lawrence, 4 years, $90 million with $60 guaranteed. And Jeffrey Simmons, 4 years, $94 million with $66 guaranteed. So, like, Buffalo's made out on this deal, like, in comparison with the rest of the draft class. So that, again, the numbers kind of make sense to me. But I think it's not a risk-averse deal. And I think a lot of people, when they see big money like that, you're like, oh, what the hell is Buffalo doing? They're investing in a guy that is only a flash in the pan. He flashes every once in a while. But the fact of the matter is, you have to do that at some point, right? Like, at some point, you got to bet the house. It's you got what's Ryan? You seem like a card guy. You seem like a degenerate gambler to me. So what is it? Is you float the river? What is it in Texas Hold'em where you go in on the river? What's that called?
I don't play poker. Sorry to
okay,
burst
I'm
your
sorry.
bubble,
I'm sorry. You
but
seem like a degenerate gambler.
It's kind of like in sports gambling, right? Like eventually you've got to play that 10-leg parlay, because every once in a while it's gonna hit.
Right.
So it's kind of that versus when you talk about Mario. I forget who it was. Somebody said earlier in the chat that we're just signing mid players now, right? Like this Ed Oliver signing, if you want to call it a mid player, it's like playing a 3-leg parlay. Like chances are it's going to work out for you. It's not going to be for a significant money, right? Like he's not going to come and he's not going to have 10 sacks for, and 70 combined tackles, in a season, right? That's just not the player he is. It's not the player he's ever been.
Right.
But if you get consistency out of him, you can take a 3-leg parlay and turn it into a plus 100 situation. You can double your money, right? Like that. There's nothing wrong with doubling your money. On a $10 bet, walking away with 20, like that's okay. Those are the types of moves you have to make as a GM. You've got, and really, I think part of this also has to do with you have got to stop losing draft picks. Like when you pick guys, you have to sign them to second contracts. Like Josh Allen cannot be the only guy that you sign to a second contract, and Dawson Knox, who again, is that contract really working itself out? I think that's up for debate. But Ed Oliver was arguably Bean's last chance for a while because you don't have a first round pick that's coming up for a contract this year. You got a whole nother year before you got another one. I mean, you've got to keep your guys intact.
You got a window. So Triggs brings up a great point. He says we get Ed Oliver 17 million, but couldn't give Edmonds 18, who had a bigger impact on this team. Regards to Oliver. So Mario, I think the 17 mil is kind of an overplayed dynamic on this deal to me, right? I don't think it's a fair. I don't think that's a fair number, right? Because the truth of the matter is we don't know what they did with that first year yet. And there's still a lot, like we know that there's a number, it was an extension, but they could restructure that first year and free up $8 million, right? And that might be D-Hop money, or you just kind of leave that be and you say, you know what, we're just going to take the extension as the extension. We're going to leave this money here. But do we see this as sort of like a flagship to Buffalo changing the way that they go about playing defense and across the defensive line? Are we seeing that they're saying, no, that rotation, this is the last hurrah for a rotational defensive front?
This is what happens when you're late to the Zoom meeting, Paul. We already talked about this.
This already happened?
That's all right. No, but you bring up a great point. And if guys just want to take the bare bone numbers as far as this goes, with his current $10 million on the cap, and you want to say, okay, 5 years, 78 million, that's 15.6. If you just want to divide it out. Okay. I just did the math for you guys. So it's not 17. So it's not going to be that high. We don't know if there are any voidable years built in,
right,
to try to knock that number down. Obviously, because it is technically 5 years, you can prorate over the length of the deal if you wanted to. And then you can also do that next year if you wanted to keep his first year numbers low. Paul knows all that. I'm not going to try to explain that, guys, because I'll mess it up. But the deal is this. He had like 49% snap count. Ryan was talking about a little bit earlier. And I said, listen, this will mark the change in the defensive philosophy for McDermott and see what's going to happen. Maybe not. It's going to be a little bit different of how Oliver plays in this defensive front. Obviously, Settle and Jones is going to be your one tech. Your three technique is going to be Oliver trying to create such a disruption. I think he's going to get more snaps now that he is paid what he's paid. You talk about Von Miller. Von Miller had like 44% snaps, but that was throughout the entire year. If he didn't get hurt, it would have been higher. But Oliver is definitely a different animal when you put him next to Miller. He's just a different kind of disruption. Now, and we also talked about the fact of you could pay, let's go back to the comment as well, 17 million for him, but you couldn't pay Edmonds 18. Well, why do you think Edmonds was able to do what he did this past season and be so successful and be such an impact player? Well, maybe it was the front four in front of him. I mean, we've talked about it for years. Edmonds got a little sticky. When there was guards free releasing on him and he couldn't really, do what he needs to do, get sideline to sideline, he got a little sticky. He wasn't really the greatest at getting off blocks. It was the blocks couldn't get to him in time because the front four wall was really holding up a lot of the bodies that were coming out to get him. So he was able to get and be an impactful player and turn it into the contract that he did for Chicago. So that's great. I think this does mark a sign, a step toward the fact that McDermott has decided to play a little bit different type of defense. I think he wants to do a little bit less of that defensive rotation, and he's going to try to, obviously milk as much as he can out of Settle and Jones and those guys up front and Phillips and all those guys. And, he's going to let Ed Oliver probably play 65% of the snap, maybe 70. I don't know if it would be that high. I'm just ballparking now with the contract that he was given. But like you guys said earlier, this contract's only going to look better as the years progress and Oliver starts to improve and he starts to do things on his own. He is a very solid disruption up there. And just side note, we're all in agreement here that he's not Donald. So anybody that's making that comparison, and I knew it was going to happen as soon as Miller came over here. Ed Oliver is not Aaron Donald, so we're not going to make comparisons to him. Donald's in a stratosphere of his own with like Mean Joe Green. He is a different type of animal
Warren
that plays
Sapp. Yeah.
yeah, different type of animal that plays.
Speaking of degenerate gamblers,
but I will never
We're on
make
the
that
subject.
comparison.
I bet he knows what. I bet he knows the phrase you were looking for, Paul.
probably, but I would never say that to his face.
No, obviously not. No.
No.
But I will never make that comparison to Donald. I mean,
Yeah.
they play the same position. That's it. They're completely different players. They're completely different guys. So, in that respect, I really do see we're gonna see a change in defensive philosophy upcoming in the 2023 season for the Buffalo Bills as far as the defensive front is concerned.
Well, now that we know that Ed is here for the foreseeable future, we don't know what the contract looks like for that first year yet. Numbers aren't officially out, but I'm sure we'll give an update once that is. And if the Bills wanted to free up money, they could here. But again, none of that's really been announced. If you take a look at that depth chart, right? Are you looking at like, is DeQuan Jones a post June 1st cut at some point when you get to roster cuts? Is Jordan Phillips a roster cut because you're going to save
Hey, you bite your
1.6
tongue.
by cutting him? I'm just saying that if you're not
Yeah,
going to go
no.
that deep in the rotation, you're really deep at interior defensive line. And now that you made the commitment to Ed, who is kind of the guy that you're like, well, we can't get rid of him because his contract's guaranteed. So we're kind of stuck there. How does that change what is going to happen to the roster? Because, I mean, at some point you got to, like, the money you save now is money you save tomorrow, right? So why pay the same position, over and over and over and over and over again?
Yeah, I mean, and it makes it easier to get rid of any of those guys that you listed, other than Oliver, right? Because none of them are going to be here after.
And settle is
anyway.
Settle is negative, right? So you're going to have more dead cap space to get rid of him. So that's why, like, Poona Ford, obviously you have probably not looking to get rid of Poona Ford. You just brought him in. He should fit great. DeQuan Jones, a post June 1st cut, you're going to save about $6 million. Of course, that rolls into next year. The money just doesn't disappear. But Jordan Phillips saved 1.6. So again, like, that's your practice squad, right? Like, you got to free up some money because once you get to the 53-man roster, you have to pay every person on the 53-man roster, plus your IR, plus your pop squad, plus your practice squad players. Like, the Bills are near over the cap as far as that's concerned. So they got to find some money here somewhere.
Yeah, I think they're going to find money because all of this is kind of uncharted territory for a lot of people. When you're going to go from 90 to 53 at once, when you don't have those, hey, we're going to cut a few guys here and there. We're going to see who gets cut. So maybe we can get cheaper deals out there. We can try to see this. When they're all happening at once, you may see trades like we talked about before. You might see some unlikely trades that you haven't seen around July time that you haven't seen before. I mean, because it'll all be, obviously trades a little bit different, but it'll all be post June 1st. Obviously, right now it'll be all post June 1st. But that being said, you don't know how those things are gonna shape out, and it's interesting. But the one thing that I wanted to do, and I wanted to wait till you got here, Paul, because I think this is very interesting. We always talk about comparable deals and setting the market. Wilkins and Williams, I'm pretty sure. I could correct me if I'm wrong, chat. Quentin Williams and Christian Wilkins, they don't have deals.
No,
currently as of right now.
Nope.
Was this the Buffalo Bills trying to beat them to the table first because those guys were all in the same draft?
I mean, you already had Simmons get one. Like, there's a couple guys that already have their contracts.
Though, you think different players, though.
I get that, right? But if you're trying to, I don't know, right? Like,
Simmons isn't in your division, though. That's the thing I'm trying to.
Buffalo does a really good job of kind of staying ahead of contracts when it comes to stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, like, you look at the Josh contract and now compare it against the absolute mind-melting craziness that is the quarterback market. Like, Josh is going to just at some point get just a pay raise. Like, at some point, his contract is going to be renegotiated, and they're just going to give him more money because he should get more money. Like, that deal is honestly simply too good for the way the market went. So Buffalo has done a really good job of staying ahead of that kind of stuff. Do I think that you're trying to beat anybody to the table for Ed Oliver? I mean, I don't know. I'm willing to have Buffalo continue to invest in their first round picks. I'm okay with that. Right? Like, it's kind of, for me, it's as simple as that. Do I want to continue to see Buffalo invest in their first round picks? Yeah, sure. Why? Yeah, sure. Why not? Right?
Yeah.
I guess. Right? Why not? Why not? But Ryan, where like for you, where do you like f- from a fit standpoint, right? Oliver is sort of an odd fit to other organizations. And I guess that's to me why the contract makes the most sense, because Ed's only a fit to like 15 organizations with if you look at the schemes that they run, right? So is the contract really market value? Because he's a very limited fit. You know, it's like a zero tech. There's some teams that just are never going to run a zero tech, right? So there's no value there. So is this contract really market value?
Yeah, and I mean, that it's something I feel the same way about the Edmonds deal, right? Like why Edmonds got so much money with Chicago, because Edmonds doesn't fit with every single team. Edmonds is not a linebacker that can play outside, right? He's a true inside linebacker. So, there's not a lot of teams out there that run that type of scheme. So I think when you see the money that he signed for and what Chicago had available to sign guys for, I think you could make the argument that Edmonds is actually overpaid based on kind of where he fell and what. So I think the same thing for Oliver. I think if he were to hit market value, it's probably, 15, maybe 16 teams that are going to be in the market for a guy like him. And then you take away, again, you take away the teams that already have that position, take away the guys that can't sign. He may have been talking to a market of 3, right? Which obviously deflates his value quite a bit. So Buffalo, I'm sure Bean does what anyone does when you negotiate contracts, right? You put it all on the table and you say, listen, Ed, this is who we're going to be competing with against at the offseason, right? This is the offer that we're going to give to you. If you overperform, hey, we'll talk about some type of additional extension. We'll talk about some type of restructure so you can get more cash in your pocket now. There's things we can do to kind of make things right if you overperform the contract. If you don't perform and you get hurt again and you only play 13 games, 12 games this season going into a contract year, we're not going to have this deal on the table again. So your hope is that you're going to go out to that market having not performed up to snuff as to what you've done over the last couple of seasons. And you've got 2 teams that are willing to pay you. Do you think that they're going to pay you what we're willing to pay you right now? And the answer is probably no, right? So as much as Oliver wants to bet on himself, I think what he sees is, I'm going to take this best contract I can get right now. It's a good extension. It's good money. It puts me in the upper half of interior defensive linemen, which is what he wants, right? That's the respect that he wants, the bag that he wants to get. If he overperforms it, we're going to talk again in 2 years, Ed. I mean, the way we structured these things, we're going to talk in 2 more years. We'll give you another extension. You continue to perform well. We'll make things right there. So it's all part of that contract negotiation. And I do agree, Paul, that I think Buffalo did a good job of capitalizing on the market, because when you think market value, he's not a quarterback, right? There's not 32 teams in the NFL that need an Ed Oliver. So that has to come into play when you're talking market conditions.
Right. And Mar, don't you think the same thing happened with Milano? Like, doesn't it feel like that's probably the same thing that happened with Milano? Because we were all just set to say goodbye to Matt Milano a few seasons ago. And then all of a sudden it's like Buffalo re-signed Matt Milano. I was like, what the hell?
We got him for a bargain.
Right.
Got him for a bargain because of the type of defense that he's asked to play.
Right.
It's like you were talking about with Oliver. The type of linebacker that Matt Milano has to play in a Sean McDermott defense is rather unique. Is he a coverage linebacker? Yeah. Was he a safety in college and came down and played linebacker? Yeah. Is he undersized at the position? Well, he used to be. Some of the linebackers that we used to talk about over the years, maybe he's undersized, but now you start to see all the linebackers that are coming out, they're former safeties. These guys are former cover guys. These are guys that just bulked up to like 225, 230. And if you're 240 as a linebacker, that's kind of like a rarity in the NFL at this point.
Those guys don't play anymore.
No, they don't.
Those guys are called thumpers now, whereas the thumpers used to be the guys that were 260, 270.
Yeah, Levon Kirkland. Position. Yeah, they don't make them anymore.
Right.
Those guys are defensive tackles at this point.
Right, like Takeo Spikes doesn't play in the league anymore, right? Guys like that don't play in this NFL. Patrick Willis, right? Those are guys that play. Those are outside line, or those are pass rushers now, not linebackers.
Do they even make shoulder pads with that wide a neck hole anymore? Takeo.
I think we could say, if I could have a cheap plug here, I mean, Bobby Wagner was the guy that started all this. I think that one of the linebackers, as far as the middle goes, that started all this, kind of undersized, but it was just a speed demon sideline to sideline. It was just an animal in coverage. Bobby Wagner could run with any running back in the NFL, and he probably still could. So I think he was one of the guys that kind of turned the heads of a lot of GMs in the NFL. Be like, listen, there's going to be more passing in the NFL. We need somebody that can run sideline, cover the run, and also cover the running backs that come out of the backfield and some of the tight ends. So I think, that being said, you're starting to see maybe a changing of the guard up front too. Obviously, you're always going to have your 1 techniques. You're going to have your 3 techniques in a 4-3. Versus a 3-4, 3-4, you're going to have a guy in there that's about 350 that just completely always eats up 2 bodies, maybe gets like 20 tackles a year. I'm glad they got Oliver. I mean, he was 12th on the team in pass defenses last year, so that's good. But the point being is this: if this is a guy that McDermott really wanted for his style of defense, he's going to play. And I don't want to give anybody any worry because it was when they were starting out. But the last time I think that McDermott put his, bang the table for a defensive tackle to be here, and they paid him handsomely, was Star Latulele. So I don't want to former first rounders. There's some comparisons. Obviously, Star played the 1 tech. He didn't play the 3. He played the 1 tech. But the point is this. I was just making a little joke for you guys to try to mesh with you. But the point is that you're starting to see a changing in the NFL. I mean, how else do you explain Dorian Williams? How do you explain that?
Mm-hmm.
This guy would be a nickel linebacker.
Yeah.
Today's, and what do the Bills play mostly? We don't know what they're going to come out in. This is interesting to see. I'm so excited to see what happens. But as far as the Oliver signing is concerned, it's smart from a bunch of different things. You didn't have any defensive tackles on the roster next year, and you got to the table before any of the guys that were mainly like in your division. So I think this puts more pressure on the Jets and the Dolphins to sign their defensive tackles. And, Oliver's like, if you don't think that Wilkins and Williams are going to the table saying 68 or 70 is the minimum, you're crazy. You're crazy.
Yeah. It's especially, when you take a look at that guaranteed money, like Ed's deal isn't in comparison to the other deals around that ballpark.
The 90 millions. Jeez.
Yeah, that's what I mean. $90 million with 60+ million guaranteed. That's Wilkins ballpark, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's Wilkins ballpark.
Yeah, if you look at those contracts that Aaron Donald and Simon signed for, like that's Wilkins money, right? That's his bag. He's going to be paid more. He's going to be the highest paid interior defensive lineman in the NFL.
Oh,
when
absolutely.
he signs his contract. And Quinn Williams is going to be directly behind him. Whoever signs first will be the highest. Whoever signs second will probably be the highest thereafter. So, those teams are the teams that are rushing to the table.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Those are the teams that are like, we have to beat the other team to sign their guy, because you can't, it's like quarterbacks, right? Like you don't want to be, that's why Lamar Jackson waited until, after Hurts got his money, right? Because that's the benchmark, that's the bar. And now it's like, okay, I've got an MVP, so I'm a little bit better than Hurts is, so give me a little bit extra money, right? And now you've got Herbert who's coming up for his contract, and it's like, hey, where do I compare in relation to Hurts and Lamar Jackson? Like that's the Quinnen Williams, Christian Wilkins situation. Right. That's not at Oliver, right? Ed Oliver's not in that stratosphere, so he's not. He's going to be continually compared to them. If only for the fact of, well, we took him when we could have taken ABC. But that doesn't mean that they're going to be comparison in contracts. And I will mention, just for what it's worth, Mario, Star Latulele was 29 when he signed that contract. So he was 3 years older than Ed Oliver is in this one. So not quite apples and oranges. But I do think that there was a conversation between Beane and McDermott about Ed Oliver's usage this season. And it's, I'm sure there was some type of, yes, he's going to be used more. Yes, I see him having a more impactful role. And Beane said that means he's going to want more money than what I want to give him. So let me get to the table with him right now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because I was real quick, Paul. I was just thinking of the fact that if that domino effect were to happen, is the fact that signing Ed Oliver for this contract meant that Wilkins and Williams are out of the division because they can't sign them. Obviously, whatever happens in Miami, if they decide to not go with Tua and they get another. They draft another quarterback, they could have the money to sign Wilkins. But with Rodgers there, Williams, it seems unlikely that he would get an extension there. If you're able to sign Oliver and then get those two animals out of the division, it's a win-win for Beane. But you're saying that his deal doesn't impact the Jets or the Dolphins at all because they were already getting that money anyway. Is that what you're saying, Rye?
Yeah, I think I don't think Ed Oliver plays into Wilkins and
Okay.
and Williams. Yeah,
Yeah,
they're
I
again
agree with that.
they're in the
All right.
they're in the Jeffrey Steinman's Aaron Donald camp. So
All right. Okay, go ahead.
Mark, you made a point saying that you blame Bobby Wagner for kind of reinventing the linebacker position. I disagree with you, and the reason that I disagree with you is, and not to shun Bobby Wagner, right? Because I think that when you look at Bob, there's a lot more to linebacker play than who the actual linebacker is, right? I think that defensive line is just so critical to the production of your linebacker group. So I want to go back into the time machine to the bookmark of the 2017 season, because 2017 to me earmarked when one team figured it out but just couldn't keep it together, right? And that that Jacksonville defense in 2017 was like nothing anybody had ever seen. They were so ridiculously fast. But when you look at what that defense was, right? You had Paul Posluszny, who was surprisingly productive. Miles Jack, who was tiny, but that's Ryan's favorite. That's Ryan's boy, Miles Jack.
That's my guy, man.
Right? Telvin Smith, who again is, you look at Dorian Williams, you look at Telvin Smith, like they're the same player to me. But you look across that defensive line, it was Eli Anku. Boy, doesn't that name sound familiar? Calais Campbell, Marcel Darius, Dante Fowler, Malik Jackson, Yannick Ngakoue. Like the team was ridiculous across the defensive line. And what that did was it allowed your linebackers to just be savages, just to be fast. That's it. All they had to do, the linebackers just had to be fast. And I think that's what Buffalo's aiming for. Jacksonville had it right in 2017. They were ahead of the curve. But that offense was just it was awful. You had Blake Bortles. Your wide receivers were Keelan Cole, Alan Hearns, Marquise Lee, Dede Westbrook.
And they were fifth in the league in scoring.
I know, right? With Chris Ivory and
those dudes were fast. The offense was fast.
And TJ Yeldon. Yeah. Right. But the point is that on the defensive side of football, Jacksonville figured it out in 2017, but they were too stupid to be able to keep it together because they built this great defense and had an offense that for some reason happened to score a bunch that year. But it was a flash in the pan. It was never going to happen again. Right.
Jeez.
Jacksonville figured it out. And I think Buffalo's taking some of those earmarks and saying, listen, we're going to build a better secondary. Right. Because AJ Bouye was there and everybody was all about him. Right.
Jalen Ramsey
and Aaron Colvin. That's my boy.
That's why you love that defense. It had Telvin Smith and Aaron Cole.
Those are my boys. But the fact is that this defense is not all that much different than that 2017 Jacksonville defense, right? If you really start peeling back the layers, they're not all that much different. They're not as heavy on the defensive end piece, right? When you have defensive ends and they're Calais Campbell and Dante Fowler, like
Yannick.
those guys, and Yannick, those guys were big boys. You don't have that here.
They can recreate that if they use this Ed Oliver money to go sign Yannick. Don't about that.
Right. Well, absolutely. Right. And maybe, that's an interesting conversation. After you trade Shaq Lawson to Miami so he can play in
stop it.
Well, it is an interesting conversation, right? Because somebody asked in the chat, I don't know who it was, but somebody did ask, like, why pull the lever now for Ed Oliver? And I think we talked about a couple of reasons, right? Like McDermott sees a bigger role for him. He sees him being more impactful. Bean wants to get somebody under contract, wants to get him at under market value. But timing is always something that you talk about, right? Why now? Why was now the time to do it? Why not training camp? Why not, midway through the season, whatever the case, right? Yeah. So Bean tends not to make these moves unless he's got something that he's making a move for, right? He's creating space for something. Mm-hmm. So is it DeAndre Hopkins, which has been speculated? Obviously, we did an entire show last week about it. Is it a pass rusher? There's a lot of pass rushers on the market, edge pass rushers. Yannick Ngakoue is, again, just mentioned him. He's a guy that's out there that you could potentially sign. So I'm curious, what's this move for? Because it's for something. It's not just for the sake of doing it and carrying $6 million of cap space into the season. So what's the move here?
Right.
That is interesting. That does sound like a show, Ryan. Look at you earning your money.
earning my free dollars. $3.99.
Ryan, we pay you in exposure.
Oh my God, Blake Bortles was abysmal that year.
It was
I mean, if you
terrible.
look at it's
Dog
worth
water.
it's worth going through because the names that are out there in terms of pass rushers that could immediately help this Buffalo Bills team, right?
Mhm.
Leonard
Right.
Floyd, Frank Clark, Robert Quinn, Jadeveon Clowney hasn't signed yet. Yannick Ngakoue. Like, there's a lot of guys out there that would probably fall in that $6 to $7 million 1 year rental type of salary range.
Yep.
Which is probably about what you're going to have in cap space after this move. There's a couple other levers we talked on last week's show that they could pull to open up even more if it's Hopkins. If it's not, and they need additional help on the defense, I think pass rusher probably makes the most sense based on the roster.
Totally agree. Yeah, totally.
Well,
agree.
here's the deal. If they're worried about saving as much as they can, Paul, what is it? Is it week 2 that veteran contracts are guaranteed?
Week 1, yeah. It's
week 1.
If you're on the roster for week 1, yeah.
Okay, all right. Because if they try to do that, if they're trying to monitor, I think this is a move to make another move. I agree with you guys. But if it's a move where they want to try to get a guy, if they see that Miller's progression is like, okay, it's week 6. If this is a move where they're going to, hey man, we'll give you 6 mil, 7 mil, like with some incentives and stuff, that to be on the roster immediately just for like we need you for 10 weeks. That's all we need you for. You know what I mean? And then we'll give you spot duty throughout. We'll pay you like per game or per, if you're on the roster for so many snaps and stuff like that. That could be what they're trying to do, because the names you mentioned, if you're able to add an Ed Oliver and free up space for one of those other freaks, like you said, I mean, there's who are some of these guys on? Melvin Ingram. I mean, he's out there. Dunlap's out there. Houston's out there. I mean, you're probably getting a 30-something guy at this point. You're not doing this to try to sign another guy to like a 3-year deal. I know that's not what it is, but hey, Kyle Van Noy, look at that. Trey Flowers, a lot of big names on here. Hey, JPP's on there.
There's a surprising when you talk about edge rushers and how important they are in this NFL. I mean, there's a surprising number of names out there of guys that could step in and make an impact right now.
Right, but Ryan, with rosters so big, it doesn't benefit those veteran pass rushers who are proven to sign now, because half the league's going to become half the rostered players are going to be free agents soon, and these guys are going to be at the top of the crop anyway. Like, they're going to be more sought after once you go through the first preseason game and teams really get a feel for what they got. They're going to look around and go, oh man, 6 mil for Ngakoue is not all that bad right now, is it? Like, we could clear up that space.
Wait,
like
I can get Justin Houston in here for $5.5 million.
Right,
yeah,
and these are guys that don't want to be at training camp anyway, right? Like, pass rushers. The truthfully speaking, how important is it? Bruce Smith never went to training camp. Like, he did not care.
Right. I mean, defensive end is one of the few positions that you don't need the warm up for, right? Like, at least an interior defensive lineman, you've got to talk about your stunts and you've got to talk about, the line shifts and things like that. Defensive end, if you're a Yannick Ngakoue, it's like, hey, you're going to line up opposite Von Miller and you just need to get to the quarterback. Like, that's all we need you to do. Like, okay, cool. I've been doing that for the last 8 years of my career. Like, I can do that.
Yeah, he still led the Colts in sacks last year with 9.5.
Yeah, you all you need to do is stay in shape, right? You need to stay in playing shape, and that's what training camp tends to be for veterans. I don't need to learn their defense. You're looking for me to pin my ears back and go get the quarterback. And there's guys out there that can do that. I mean, Frank Clark is another one, right? Like,
oh my God,
Frank Clark has been an epitome over the last 3 seasons of. He's been like the Jimmy Butler of the NFL, right? Where he just kind of like coasts through the regular season. Postseason comes around, and he's got like 6 sacks by the time you look up, and you're like, holy shit, Frank Clark, he's back, right? Like, he's there that man is again. So I mean, he's another one that would be, I think, very interesting for Buffalo.
How is he only 30? How is he only 30?
Because he doesn't play throughout the regular season. Like,
that's true.
He coasts through the regular season and he puts his miles on in the postseason, and he only has to do that, 3 games.
Yeah, true. And then depending on the rotational front that they decide to do, how's it going to work? I mean, obviously that I knew that was a draw for Von Miller coming here, because he was going to extend his career by coming to that rotational defensive front. And if you change it the first year and he comes back from an ACL, getting another guy like that is smart, because then you replace Von Miller with Frank Clark and they rotate in and out. Are you kidding me? on the opposite side of Rousseau.
Right.
Okay.
Well, but I mean, is that part of the reason why people are bitching about the Ed Oliver contract? Because if you look at what defensive end play has really been here during Ed Oliver's tenure, like we are like at Kmart blue light special defensive end play. Like it has not been good. And if you take a look at when Von Miller was here in Ed Oliver's production versus when Von Miller wasn't here in Ed Oliver's production, it might not look all that different. But the fact of the matter is that defense was completely different with Vaughn here. And Ed was a totally different player with Vaughn here. So if you go out and get Ed Ngakoue, it totally changes the paint job on that Ed Oliver contract. And I really can't be convinced of that otherwise.
Yeah, because like we talked earlier, Mario, like without Vaughn, without a legitimate pass rusher on the inside, like Ed Oliver's getting double teams thrown at him, and you've also got a running back who's waiting for him in the hole when and if he does make that penetration, you start to add legitimate pass rushers on the outside, and that running back has to get out there to chip, or you've got to throw it, you've got to put your running back in motion so that he can get a shoulder on the pass rusher as he makes his way out into the flat or into the wheel route. Now suddenly there's nobody in the backfield, right? And that Oliver, all he has to do is beat his man head up because you're shifting the guard out to the left-hand side to deal with Miller to give the tackle some help. It's a completely different situation, and Oliver's more than capable of handling one-on-one situations against any center or guard that he's going to line up with in the NFL. So especially against teams like, I don't know, Miami, who don't have a very good offensive line, New England, who doesn't have a very good offensive line, the Jets, who arguably don't have a very good interior offensive line situation. Like, Ed Oliver could very well have a career year this year if they can get some legitimate guys. If Rousseau, can take another step, if Miller's back week 1 through 6, somewhere in that range, I think Ed Oliver is going to have a really good situation this season to be successful.
Are we talking about Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen situation here, where Oliver's only good because he has Miller out there, so you need another stud rusher in order for him to be productive?
Yeah, I mean, was Michael only good because he played with Scottie his entire career? I don't know. Who knows?
Oh, no, God, stop it with this. But I will say, though, that whatever you do, if you do address the defensive end position by signing one of those big name free agents, again, it is not a surprise that they are not signed. They don't need to be right now. They're the cream of the crop of that market anyway. They'd be less desirable on a team right now. So, but it's not an indictment of Rousseau if you go out and get somebody.
Oh.
I think fans but I think a lot of fans would see it that way. Like, oh, well, you just spent a first round pick on Rousseau. What are you doing signing this guy when Vaughn's going to be back in week 6 or week 8 or whenever Vaughn's going to return?
It's an indictment of everybody opposite Rousseau.
I think that's exactly right. Yeah, that's absolutely
because
true.
Again, Von Miller's he's like your right, like he's the closer. He's the third down clear passing situation. All right, bring in Miller, right, kind of thing. Or late game situation, 4th down, got to make a play, bring in Miller, and he opposite Rousseau. Other than that, for the other 60% of snaps that Miller's not going to play, what does your situation look like opposite Greg Rousseau? And if it's AJ Epinesa, Shaq Lawson, Boogie Basham, like that's a problem. As much as I like Lawson, and I think he has a spot on this team as a run stopping defensive end, when push comes to shove, he's not an above average defensive lineman that you're going to need, against some of these high powered offenses you're going to face this season. So it's much more, like you said, Paul, it's much more of a admission that we need someone opposite Rousseau to allow him to be effective. And these guys aren't cutting it outside of Miller.
Right.
You need somebody opposite Rousseau that is the enforcer and only plays 40% of the snaps. Melvin Ingram solves that for you. He can be an enforcer for you on the other side there, even at 34. And like Paul said, they're not looking to get signed now. They don't want to go to camp now. Who wants to go to camp? Nobody. Nobody wants to go to camp now. Guys that are in camp don't want to be in camp.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean?
Right, but you also need, when Vaughn returns, Vaughn's not going to be taking 60% of his snaps. When Vaughn comes back, Vaughn's going to be taking 35% of snaps.
Vaughn's role is Vaughn's role. Vaughn's role is not going to change just because he comes back from an ACL injury, right? So,
no.
Yeah, but I mean, I think there's we can do an entire show on the names that are out there and who fits best in this situation, but there's a lot of names out there. And again, I think that it's worth the conversation.
Yeah.
What's more valuable to this team? Is it one of these, if you have to choose, is it one of these legitimate pass rushers who can make an impact, who can go out and get you double-digit sacks at the drop of a dime?
Yeah.
Like there's a number of guys out there. Or is it a DeAndre Hopkins? Like, because that's the conversation that you're probably having. Is it one of these high-end pass rushers plus Kenny Galladay at league minimum versus DeAndre Hopkins, right?
You stole that from the chat. Don't lie that you didn't steal that from the chat.
I thought it was a good idea. Who put it on? Spin.
Spin.
Yeah.
He
put it on there.
Well, it makes sense. I mean, he did play. Well, I don't think he played very much, but he wasn't Daboll's offense for a year. I mean, so it wouldn't be that much of a transition for him to come over to Buffalo. But that is definitely a discussion that needs to be had. To your point, though, earlier, Ryan, you were mentioning the Patriots and the Dolphins. Getting another edge rusher outside of Miller across from Rousseau is beating those teams. No offense to those teams. Well, maybe New England. It's not beating those teams. It's beating the Kansas Cities, the Cincinnatis. That's why you need those guys.
Mm-hmm.
I will wholeheartedly say that's why you would want those guys, is for those teams, especially. Maybe you can put Baltimore in there too. But those are the teams that you need to beat, and you need to have another edge rusher on the team with Miller missing significant time. And but with to wrap this up, we're talking about Ed Oliver signing. Obviously, you guys know 4 years, $68 million. That contract's only going to look better with time, guys. If you want to add in the $10 million he's supposed to be making this year prior to coming out, obviously, if you listen to this or you're watching it right now, we don't have all the details. When you get all the details, you're going to see how it's broken down. But if you just taking it at face value right now, it's technically 5 years, $78 million, which is $16.5 a year for a defensive tackle. That is an impact player, former first-round pick. That's a steal. However you feel about Oliver, that's a steal. This guy is an impact player as a 3 technique in McDermott's defense, and he's now here until 2027. So, you guys got anything else to add, gentlemen?
I just think if you're questioning at Oliver's value to the Buffalo Bills, can you name 16 interior defensive linemen in the NFL that you'd rather have on your team than him? Because if you can't, then their contract's fine. And again, when Wilkins and Quinnen Williams, sign, there's going to be 2 more ahead of him in that count. So I think just ask yourselves that: are there 16 guys that I'd rather have in that spot than at Oliver? And also go click on the list of interior defensive linemen, because I think some of those names will surprise you, of guys that you may think are interior defensive linemen and they're really edge rushers or something like that. So
yeah, and for the value too, for 60, how many of those guys can you get for $68 million for 4 years? You can't. You can't get those guys.
None of the top 10, that's for sure. Yeah.
No, not at all.
Right. And really, the Ed Oliver extension allows you the opportunity to take Ed Oliver on a 1-year, $10 million fully guaranteed contract and turn it into Ed Oliver plus another piece, and that's why that deal makes a lot of sense. Not only are you taking the chance on a player who could boom for you, even if he just maintains the play that he's had, it's at least consistent. At a position that is getting very expensive inside the NFL. Like the interior defensive line position is a very expensive one in the NFL. It wasn't always that way, right? Because guys were kind of pigeonholed based off a scheme, but it's becoming a very lucrative position. And if you think you've got a guy who's a top 20 player, it's better to pay him sooner than later, right? So you just lock that in, you just move on. But again, if you could take that Ed Oliver deal and turn it into Ed Oliver and Ngakwe, Ed Oliver and Clowney, Ed Oliver and Frank Clark, even if it's only for 1 year, that makes so much more sense than just suffering through a 1-year, $10 million guaranteed contract with Ed Oliver, right?
Because then what? Right? Because then what happens if he takes a step forward in McDermott's defense? He goes out and gets 6 sacks and 50 total tackles, right?
Right. Like, who wants to draft a defensive tackle in the first round? I don't. Exactly, I don't want to do that again.
No.
Yeah, because he goes out and gets 6 sacks and again 50 tackles in his 5th-year option year. I mean, okay, now we're talking like Christian Wilkins, like Quinnen Williams money, like not quite there, right, but he's right on the cusp of that tier. So this is a totally we don't want to lose him scenario, and let's get him locked in at a fair value. These contracts will keep making it look better. And like Paul said, and we can add somebody to this defense or offense that will make the team even better. So I'm all for it.
Yep. So hashtag Nation Bills Mafia. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button on your way out. Make sure you follow all of our socials, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. All shows will be going on iTunes and Spotify. Tonight's show is sponsored by Mr. Rogers Homes in association with Crier.co. Thank you guys for joining us tonight. Hopefully made you feel a little bit better about that Oliver signing. We're out of here.
Hello, fellow Bills fans. Sean Rogers, Realtor and lead of the Mr. Rogers Homes team. Did you know that real estate is one of the best ways to build wealth, and right now is one of the best times to own an investment property in Arizona? Please reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to answer any of your questions so we can take the next step to your financial freedom here in the Valley of the Sun, utilizing real estate. As always, God bless America and go Buffalo!